U.S. soccer and its decisions has proven for years in all aspects to be a radioactive, toxic mess in a lot of ways. Poor decisions, particularly on how to manage coaching spats and changes, have plagued U.S. soccer, not only through its main programs on the outdoor side, but also through its niche programs with an absolute carousel of coaches that have gone through things like beach soccer, our futsal programs, as well as many others. Once again, we find ourselves with a massive coaching bombshell out of U.S. soccer. Let's dive right into it. Let's take a quick look at the women's program as it stands. Back in March of 2023, Marcia Tafa was announced as the inaugural women's coach. Now, I actually was, even back then, very critical of how U.S. soccer was handling the women's program because it was a very lazy announcement. They gave us no background on Tafa herself. In fact, Steve Harris, someone who I have a lot of respect for in the futsal community based out of Japan, did a way better article covering Tafa's path to ultimately becoming a national team coach, and even better than what U.S. soccer could do. And I even criticized the fact that the picture of Tafa in their announcement is actually her in a Brazil jersey that they just photoshopped to be white. They couldn't even get a recent photo of Tafa for a big announcement in a really big way in the historical start of the first ever women's futsal program in the United States. But nonetheless, we charged on. Tafa was actually a big part of the recruiting process up to this point with assistant coach Sasha Filippi. It's been a 21-month stint as a coach with zero competitive action in the meantime, but just cultivating and building a team. Because of the limited resources provided by U.S. soccer, I noticed and have criticized on the channel that the women's team is mainly comprised from these two coaches' backyards. Now, that's not entirely their fault. They don't have the resources from U.S. soccer to home the United States, let alone beyond. But we do see a couple of shining lights from outside of their backyards in California and Virginia in the initial call-up for this year. They just came out of a camp, so this news is extremely shocking for that reason. And just as mysteriously as Tafa was announced, I actually found out in that time, much later, why there was very little announced about her in that announcement. And I think that the kind of more or less conspiracy theory around it is the fact that higher tier candidates, world-class coaches, had applied for the job that had international coaching experience and were looked over for Marcia. So it's really interesting that U.S. soccer took the approach they did. I suspect that it's a money thing and that they can't afford to provide for the world-class coaches, and they would not be willing to meet the requirements of what a world-class coach would want to properly cultivate a women's program that would be successful. As we know, and we've talked about ad nauseum on this channel, the U.S. futsal programs are under the charitable arm of U.S. soccer, so budget is virtually non-existent compared to what the big boys get. You guys also know how I think we need to fix that. But the important thing here is that just as mysteriously as Tafa was hired, really a surprise hire, she has disappeared. So we don't know at this point in time whether U.S. soccer split ways with Tafa or if Tafa stepped away from the program for personal reasons. That was not explained in the article. I will say that typically in sports, if it is a mutual split, that is said. If it is because of personal problems, that is said. So I find it kind of interesting. And then what's even more interesting is the replacement was immediately announced as men's interim head coach Diego Burato. Now, when we covered Diego becoming the interim coach on this channel, I was critical of that decision. I will be critical again. This is someone who has 7 international caps, has virtually no international coaching experience other than that single camp that they used to burn off the remaining budget from 2023 after failing to make the World Cup. I have also said in live streams where we watched U.S. futsal how I did not think that his attitude was very good on the court. The whole team was guilty of that, but there were definitely moments with Burato that hurt us in those games and led to our losses. So I've been very critical of that, and now this person who is unproven handles our women's program just a month before its most critical moment in history, and that is its inaugural competitive matches against Costa Rica. Now, according to this U.S. soccer article written on January 28th, they will be facing Costa Rica this month in February for their next camp, and then having a third camp before the CONCACAF Championships in April. I actually had a few notes written up about how I was about to praise U.S. Soccer for doing this right and preparing for CONCACAF correctly with 3 camps leading up to the women's game. And I was also going to say as a caveat, and I still will, the reason they're able to do this is because this split budget now between the men and the women is going to be focused on the women. You don't have to ask U.S. Soccer to understand that. There will be no activity from the men to supplement the funding for the women to prepare for this correctly, which I find very interesting. And I have not proven that or talked to anyone about that, but it's just very obvious that that's what's happening because there has not been a head coach announced for the men. And I don't believe, and I predicted before in another channel video, that would remain the case probably for this year. The problem I have with this is we have an unproven coach, an underqualified coach leading our women out of the gate. And I just want to say this, and I think that it's pretty common knowledge, and I think most people would agree with me, if not all. If the United States fails to qualify at CONCACAF in their inaugural women's contest, it will be an epic, epic failure. There is no reason in the world why U.S. Soccer shouldn't make it out of CONCACAF into the World Cup based on the women's sports infrastructure in the United States. It will carry this program, even though the program itself is not strong. So I'm very curious to see what happens next, but I'm also very curious because as we look at the women's game on the outdoor side, we've seen the rest of the world start to catch up. So I think that they will make the World Cup. I think they will be one of the better teams in CONCACAF, especially considering how sloppy CONCACAF has been with preparation for the women's competition. They technically have not announced the dates yet, but I do have on good authority from a couple very good sources that I trust very deeply that they will be at the end of April. So we will see some rapid fire women's action coming out of U.S. Soccer leading up to that contest. And hopefully we can do some watch parties around some of the games, depending on what that schedule looks like. And we can kind of do what we did for the men last year. And we will be cheering for them. I will be cheering for them and I will be wishing them and Coach Burato the best. But I have serious reservations beyond that point of any form of success. I think once this team is challenged by South American and European teams, then it will crumble and its true weakness will show. We have to clean this up and shore this up for futsal. Part of that is proving that there is a desire for the sport. We have to prove to U.S. Soccer, we have to prove to CONCACAF and FIFA that there is a demand for this. Now, FIFA has at least recognized the growth of the sport, but I don't think as a community still have proven enough to U.S. Soccer that there is a growth for the sport. So hopefully some more things change. Hopefully some sustainable leagues find their way into the fray. And I think that those will be coming soon, but that is a conversation for a video on another day. Curious what you guys think about this appointment. I know there are fans of the channel that are also fans of Coach Burato. I'm sure he's a great guy, but the fact is on paper, this looks like a disaster waiting to happen to me. I wish I knew, and I wish I knew Tafa well enough to ask myself, what spurred this change. I hope that everything in Tafa's life is clean and is doing well, and this is not a split because of personal issues in her life. And we wish her the best as well, and hopefully see her show up again in the futsal community in a positive way. What do you guys think about all this and all these shifts in these individuals? Sound off in the comments below. And as always, until I talk to you then, don't forget to play with your soul.